In our exploration of law and justice so far, we've focused on the Greek world, the world of classical Greece, the world that gave birth to democratic Athens, the world that produced the philosophers Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. And we've explored their theories of justice, especially the theories of justice outlined by the philosopher Aristotle. And we mentioned in our last lesson that Aristotle is a symbolic figure in many ways. And his career takes us through the end of a particular period of ferment, of extraordinary intellectual energy in classical Greece, the classical period. And Aristotle lives at the very end of that period. And it's symbolic that Aristotle himself is the tutor to the Macedonian prince, Alexander. Now, Alexander's father, King Philip II of Macedonia, would be responsible for beginning to destroy the independence of the classical Greek city-state, the polis, this unit of life that gave the Greeks such tremendous energy and variety across the Greek world. In 338 BC, at a major battle, the Battle of Chaeronea, King Philip II destroyed an alliance of Greek city-states, and that represents symbolically the end of the age of the polis. Alexander himself would succeed his father to the throne of Macedon and would enjoy an extraordinarily successful career, establishing his power in Macedon, conquering Greece, and then invading Persia, overthrowing the Persian Empire, taking over Egypt, and invading what's now India, establishing an extraordinarily large empire, bringing Greek culture and Greek language throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and throughout the Near East. The age of Alexander was the beginning of an age of empires, when the polis itself would recede behind the power of much larger political structures that would rule over vast territories. And Aristotle lives at the end of this age, the age of the polis, and at the beginning of the age of empires. We call this age the Hellenistic Age. Hellene is a Greek. It is the word that the Greeks use for their own language. The Hellenistic period was a period itself rich in intellectual development and philosophical advances, with new philosophical systems coming to the fore. We'll look at some of these systems like Stoicism and Epicureanism in future lessons. What's most important, though, is the rise of a state, a Hellenistic kingdom in a way, that would come to be the greatest of all of these empires. Of course, this Hellenistic kingdom had a curious feature. They didn't speak Greek. They spoke a language called Latin. For it is the Romans who will now come to occupy our attention. The Romans, one of the greatest peoples of the ancient world, one of the great empire builders in all of human history, one of the most important civilizations in all of human history, come out of the end of the Greek world, come out of the end of this period of Greek dominance. The Romans are relative latecomers to the world of the Mediterranean and its power politics. They're latecomers in terms of cultural development. When the Greeks have invented philosophy and history, when they've produced Herodotus and Thucydides, when they've produced Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides, the tragic playwrights, when they've produced Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. In other words, when Greek culture has made such enormous advances in these different realms of human thought, the Romans are still practically illiterate. The Romans arise at the end of the period of Greek cultural efflorescence. And the Romans will come into this world and will nevertheless establish the greatest empire in this world of the Mediterranean. Now, the Romans are an extraordinary peoples, and they are one of the most extraordinary cultures in all of world history. They are one of the two classical civilizations. Along with the Greeks, the Romans establish a civilization that for centuries after their demise would be regarded as the standard of cultural achievement. Unlike the Greeks, their language is Latin. And whereas the Greeks flourish in the human arts, in the culture and fine arts, the Romans will be great empire builders, great politicians, great generals, great military commanders, great creators of systems of law. The Romans are great civil engineers, great architects. And they learn from the Greeks and indeed will adapt Greek culture and will always regard Greek philosophy as the gold standard to which their civilization can aspire. We traditionally divide the enormous period of Roman influence into different phases: the monarchy, the republic, and the empire. These are three different phases of Roman development. The monarchy, which traditionally lasts from 753 BC to 509 BC, is the early period of Roman history, when Rome is truly a primitive cattle town of no more than a few thousand people at most, extremely insignificant. And this period of Roman history is virtually myth. We know it only through much later legends, because the Romans at this time have no alphabet. They have no way of recording their own history. And what we know survives only through the murkiest of legends that survive across the centuries. And our surest foundation of knowledge for this period is, in fact, archaeology, which can only tell us so much about the laws and culture of early Roman civilization. From 509 BC down to, say, 31 BC, this period of almost 5 centuries, we call the Roman Republic. And over the next several lectures, we'll explore what Republicanism is and why we call this period the Roman Republic. It's an age when the Romans live without the rule of a monarch, without a king. It's one of the longest experiments in all of human history of a civilization that tries to live without a single ruler, without a monarch. In 31 BC, a Roman general that we'll come to learn about wins a naval battle at Actium and begins to consolidate his single rule. He begins to establish, in effect, a monarchy once again, to become an emperor. And so we call this period of Roman history, beginning in 31 BC and lasting until the fall of the Roman Empire, which we might consider to be the 5th century AD. So again, we're talking about another 500 years of human history. This period we call the Roman Empire, an extraordinary period when Roman culture, Roman values will spread throughout the Mediterranean world and will make Latin the basis of European culture for centuries to come. This is the sweep of Roman history, lasting over a millennium and laying the foundations for all subsequent European culture. The Romans have an enormous part in the history of law and justice. Roman law is itself the foundation of many continental legal systems up to this day, and it has an extraordinary influence even beyond Europe. The influence of Rome that we'll explore through the next several lessons can be considered broadly in 3 terms: the influence of the idea of a republic, the idea of Roman law, and the influence of the universal religions, like Christianity, that will arise in the Roman Empire. And over the next few lessons, we'll explore the significance of republicanism, of Roman law, and of the universal religions, and their place in the history of law and justice.